Here.
Stephen Yerger.
Here. Please rise for the pledge of allegiance and the Holy Cross.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We now recognize members of the public who have signed up to provide comment as stipulated in policy 903. When your name is called, please approach the podium and state your name, confirm that you are a resident or taxpayer in the district, and topic of discussion for the record. Please direct your comments to the board as a whole and not the individual. We ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. This is a privilege to speak, may be interrupted, revoked, or recessed, and the meeting may be called by the chair if the speaker does not observe reasonable decorum and orderly conduct. Thank you. Suzanne Johnson.
My name is Suzanne Johnson, and I'm a district parent, resident, taxpayer, and voter. With elections on the horizon, board members are now repeating my concerns that the district projects deficits when creating the budgets, while there's actually a history of surpluses after each year's audit. It appears that you tell us there will be a deficit when creating the budget to justify raising taxes so that there will then be a surplus to fund additional spending. Last June, the administration asked for a 1% tax increase per year for 3 years to build up to an estimated $500,000 bond payment per year for the new ACTI building project. At the same time they were asking for a tax increase, the interim superintendent was projecting a budget surplus and told the Gettysburg Times, quote, "We are almost depending on our revenues for the school year, and it is plain to see we will come in several $millions under budget on the expense side." So voters need to be asking, why didn't you stand up for the taxpayers instead of raising taxes when the district was expecting a surplus of several $millions? Despite the expected surplus, 5 out of 9 board members approved the 2024-2025 budget with a 1% tax increase, including Thompson, Lawyer, Yerger, Bressler, and Mary Brenneman. Last month, Yerger claimed to be concerned about these same taxpayers and the tax increase for ACTI this year, but had no problem rubber stamping it before. Last year, Bressler justified approving the tax increase by saying, quote, "It equals out to be basically $18 a month. A Starbucks drink's about $8, so if I go to cut something out, for our students, that is what we gotta do." Thompson argued by putting revenue from the tax increase into the ACTI reserve, that's the only way, quote, "That's the only way we can technically make money on the interest. So we get to put that back into the general fund to use it to defer costs for other items. We get to put the money aside and we get to make money with it," end quote. Despite the priority of career and technical education for our students and our community's workforce, school leaders only want to fund ACTI with tax increases and didn't allocate any of the budget surplus to this critical investment. In November, when the audit was showing that there would be a $3.75 million budget surplus, which would be the equivalent of about 7 years of ACTI payments from money already collected from the taxpayers instead of new tax revenue. Sullivan was the only one that voted against moving $3.2 million to capital reserves. Yerger, Ewan, and Lovell say they're concerned about taxpayers and don't want tax increases, but they approved allocating most of the surplus to the capital reserves. Sullivan was the only one that voted against spending all of that on athletic fields and facility improvement projects, beyond what you already financed for the ACES and middle school and high school building projects. With $4 million in bond payments each year, which is 10% of the budget, already going to debt services, plus new debt from ACTI, taxpayers are justified in our concern about the new spending this board approved before the election season. During the previous campaign, Bressler said, quote, "We need a board who will engage with the community and not ignore the taxpayers, parents, and community members when they have a concern. There needs to be better interaction, such as town halls and Q&A during public comments at meetings." Of course, that hasn't happened. "We need a board who is fiscally responsible in making decisions towards better academics. We need a board to hold the superintendent accountable," end quote. actions speak louder than words, and your voting records make it clear that electing Ressler, Yerger, Ewan, Thompson, and Lawyer would just bring more spending that increases taxes without improving students' outcomes, which has resulted in our district having the lowest PSSA scores in the county. Instead of just empty campaign promises, we need school leaders that respectfully engage with all community members and hold the administration and each other accountable to prioritize our students while also easing tax burden. I pray that voters will be better informed to elect school board members that don't attempt to suppress transparency and actually bring the positive changes we need in the school district.
Thank you. Okay, Tom.
Let's jump into there we go, financial presentation for the month. Let's just kind of further our budget discussions about what came up at the last work session in particular, but the first slide here we'll go through is just a reminder of what has happened here at the Finance Committee level within the budget. So at the top here, we start off with those budget cuts. So within the budget, some items were cut through some of that analysis, both through administration and the board. So some of those cuts were that one FTE or one staff member, which was we identified as that middle school math position. And then we identified several fees, software, supplies, and equipment along the lines of some of those consolidation efforts from Dr. Berryman, the transportation bus cycle, and items like that that were cut out of this budget from prior year's budget. So just a refresher on that. And then we kind of broke it down this year into priorities. And some of those priorities you can see in the two that were in decline and accepted. So the priorities, just a refresher, we had the priority of moving the part-time admin assistant at the high school to a full-time position starting next year. That was declined. We also had to add an equipment replacement cycle for maintenance, in particular the water wheel. That was also declined to move forward. Technology lease, which was Chromebooks, which is declined at this time. ACTI authority funding, we also removed that. And then we had the initial discussion of security officer. There's no money attributed because we didn't go down the path of actually seeing what that would cost. We nixed that before we went down through the cost pathway. So that's the decline bucket. So that's just a refresher of all that. And then the accepted of the priorities was the digital document management system to go along with our document management so that through the transition of the middle school to the high school and all the backlog that Dr. and I have talked about for several months of how we're getting that up to this day and age and how we can digitize those and bring those forward. That software is a $10,000 cost to the district to maintain that software. And then we talked about adding a teaching assistant for a secondary emotional support classroom that has been looking for some support for years. They're the last one that needs a teaching assistant in that classroom, and we added that back in. And then tonight, which will be the focus of tonight, are the two pending items from the last work session. So we had the technology lease cycle where the board asked Dr. Netter to research into iPads. Now we're looking about how we can finance those iPads if that's something the board wishes to add back into the budget, because right now that cycle is out. It was originally on Chromebooks, it's out, so we want to add it back in, and we want to add it back in under iPads. This is the cost, and this will be a discussion around that. And then subsequently, the autism classroom, that was the discussion we'll be having.
And leases for elementary school?
Correct. And so these were the K.
Kindergarten and third grade if we were moved forward.
And then each year we would add other grades.
Kindergarten and third grade each year.
Yes. It always stays the same. It just
take their devices with them,
Right.
kindergartners
Yes.
take them,
Gotcha.
it follows the student through.
a 3-year cycle.
Yeah. So we'll have a discussion about that, and then the autism classroom where we're having some students come into our district from preschool, and also some that are being need to be placed that were in and outside placement. So we'll have a discussion around
They have already signed up for kindergarten.
Yes. Yes. I don't know if they officially, but yes.
Yeah, kindergarten registration is taking place, and that's part of what Dr. Fiaschi does. With that kindergarten registration, she researches and seeks out those students that may be in placements or may need special needs. So Tom, that first section that you provided is just what I hear you telling us, is that sort of review of where we've been and what we've discussed.
So this started back in December, January, when we first kind of looked at this. Internally, I should say, December, and then it went out to the FPS committee in January, February, March, April, and now we're here in May. So I'm just showing the work that we've done and the decisions that were made that were either moved forward or not.
And just to clarify, we're not gonna not have a math teacher, we're using a high school math teacher.
Correct.
Yes, that was a reduction of staff, and then it was a restructure around that reduction of staff.
And we are doing $180,000 for ACTI from last year's 1% every year.
Correct.
at
This would be an
least,
additional,
At the very least.
this would be an additional
Right.
addition of 180,000, so year two essentially of the three-year progression. Any other questions about, what's?
And the fields are all in this budget.
The fields will be on the capital projects, which will be addressed usually every fall. But that time frame those won't be on this budget, because that's not a general fund, that's a capital reserve project. So we'll revisit those, what we want to earmark towards those again usually it's November, October, November, kind of depends on timing. And then we'll actually have a later date when we go out to bid and do that stuff. So we'll review that again this fall, and then we'll have a final review when the bid documents are completed.
So one of the things that I just want to share is I think what I've heard and what Tom's placing here is, these are the things that we've talked about within the budget. Tonight's discussion's purpose is really to determine where and how we're going to fund them. Are we going to use general fund to fund them, or are we going to use any taxes? We understand that the committee is looking at overall supporting a 0% tax increase. So we understand that. We're simply looking for guidance as to what areas and where we're going to pay for some of these needs that we have. Or do we not need to pay for some of the things, like the technology devices?
As the text
So,
is.
yep.
Yeah,
So I just want to make sure that the purpose for tonight was out and everyone understood that.
And the main focus would be on the bottom two items, the pending items, to see if they fall in the declined or the accepted, or where we feel, and then options based off of the decision that's made. So that's where the next slide will come in, which I said is kind of the true focus here tonight about the budget. This is just a reminder piece of what made it, what didn't make it, to know what some of the numbers include and don't include with the later slides. So I guess we'll jump into the discussion. We'll start off with the technology piece. So Dr. Naylor got the quote. It was $136,000 for the Apple iPads, which if we would choose the leasing option, which is the recommendation because it's 0% financing, that's a 3-year lease, so that breaks down to $45,492 for each year for 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, we would look to go back to the board and say, do we want to replace those again? We do that every year. We have them staggered, so they come about 1 or 2 come due every year because we have several in cycles. So we break down what the financing options are for this. So obviously that can equate to a tax increase because this is a cyclical nature. We believe we are not going to move away from a 1-to-1 scenario. So this technology cycle product,
And again, these are for K through 3?
just K and 3.
K and
Because they take it with them.
Yeah, it would be a 3-year process.
Right,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, so this would be, those devices would lifespan would be 3 years, and at the end of those 3-year lease, we would look to replace those with brand new ones again. So just like everything, we have several that will come due. We've already approved one Apple lease, so 3 years from now, if we approve one, we would have 2 Apple leases. We typically have 2 every year because we stagger 2 grade levels. So I believe it's 6 and 10, 9 and 12, and 1 and 3. But we stagger them now, so it's 2 hit
And
every.
what do kindergartners do with computers?
That I can't answer.
Play games, learn phonics, learn phonemic awareness, connect
Read
other
to
sounds.
them. They do interactive read alouds with them. I'm ready.
And then the iPad will have a touch screen.
So with the leasing,
Mhm.
we don't get to, we give them back at the end of 4 years.
There's a buyback, which Dr. Miller provided what the buyback options are. So with all Apple devices, there is a buyback method. The caveat is the Chromebooks no buyback.
So we still get $85 a device for giving them back, even if it's lease?
If they're,
Conservative, that's
if they're in good
conservative.
I think that's what you put on the paper.
yeah.
So that's what I wasn't understanding, since it was a lease, we still get
Yes.
that money at the end. That's-
Correct. That's
good.
part of the lease agreement that Apple does for educational facilities. They are very generous in their offers for educational facilities. Obviously, they're more expensive devices, but some of the back end, we get some of that buyback from them.
So you can't make them stretch more than 3 years with them.
Different order to get a buyback.
So, yeah, so we would not, I guess it's,
I'll take that,
I
Tom.
was gonna say,
The guarantee is after 3 years. The guarantee is $85. They can't guarantee that after 3 years. So it could be significantly less. But the fortunate part of that would be, as I shared earlier, that's a conservative estimate. Dr. Naylor shared with me the listing of the iPads that he sold. He sold several more back for substantially more than $85 per device. That money going back could go right into the next lease, so that could offset and lower than the lease cost.
And this
So this-
45,000 a year is not including the eventual buyback.
Correct. It's the purchase. So in 3 years, we would see that first buyback of this cycle take effect for the elementary school. We already see that buyback at the high school and the middle school.
yeah, and we would only issue the buyback if the board would then reissue a new lease to replace what's being bought back. So it's kind of we have to wait the 3 years out, and the board says we're willing to then do a new lease. Dr. Naylor would then issue a buyback in conjunction with the new
The next
lease.
cycle.
Correct. So we wouldn't do that until we knew we had a new lease to replace these ones.
So, but there isn't, the option is there, so we're kind of buying them, but it's a lease. So like if we get them and say a future board decides not to do the buyback and just keeps the ones that we have for a year, then they're ours. We don't have to do
Correct.
any additional, we don't have to pay anything additional.
It's similar to like a lease to own option.
There you go.
We get to
Yeah,
own
that's
those
exactly
essentially.
what it is.
Yeah, lease to own, okay. And then they're giving you credit for.
And the reason we do the leasing instead of outright buying them is because they're 0%, so we can lessen it to 45.5 instead of 136 upfront across 3 years, because it's 0%. If the Chromebooks that we saw was a percentage increase, so some of that is, do we want to outright buy them, or is the interest rate low enough that it's offsets? So but this is 0, so that takes that out of the equation.
We also have to keep them current enough so that when we do updates for all of our testing and CDTs and stuff, that the software is updated. So if you start keeping them 4, 5, 6 years, they don't update, you can't do the state testing and diagnostics.
And this is for how many iPads?
I believe 300 to 350,
Yeah, I think it's
somewhere in
around
that
300
ballpark.
iPads.
And so that's 2 grade level?
It would also cover teachers.
Teachers, yeah.
So what I'm assuming is, next year, you're gonna wanna do the same thing, to replenish for the next.
Yeah, and next year, we wouldn't
2
necessarily
classes.
have to replace or replenish for those teachers that got them. This takes care of all the teachers up front,
And students take.
K through 5.
And I would say one of the caveats here is this is one of the cycles was purchased with ESSER funding, so it was never in the budget. I believe the next cycle of Chromebooks is already within the budget scope, so it would just be the difference between what we have budgeted for Chromebooks versus what iPads would cost. So that would be, I believe, I would have to double check that, but I believe this is the last of all the leases that are not currently in the budget. So all the other ones that we have ramped up, accumulated in the budget, this is the last one that we purchased outright 3 years ago, 4 years ago. That's
And this leasing program will make all our devices all the same.
At the elementary school.
It will, no, it'll go Apple.
Oh,
it would go
across the
yes,
board,
you'll
yes.
see across the board Apple.
Which-
After a few years of changing out
Leaving it in
Chromebooks.
for 3 years, okay.
So then back to the financing options, obviously the first option is if the committee would want to designate a tax increase to that. Obviously, we do have tech reserve fund balance for that. So we could use the 45.5 for 3 years. Currently, there's $500,000 in the tech reserve fund balance. And then the last thing is to be able to lock this in and have devices for next year, we are asking if the finance committee would make a decision, yes or no, so that it can be on May's agenda, because that quote was good up to the May agenda.
Yeah, I think I looked at Dr. Naylor's most recent quote, and I think it's valid through May 23rd. So it would encompass the May
So
board
there has
meeting.
to be an action.
There would have to be a recommendation
Either
from the
a
committee to move
recommendation
forward.
to use the tech reserve and fund that, or to say, we're gonna wait.
Well, we originally wanted to put it on hold and wait another year because the Chromebook price, whatever, it went up 30,000 in 1 week, remember that? And that's what, the whole thing started. But if we've got a better deal and what the teachers want, and we have a tech reserve fund, I'm okay with going with it.
So that would be, it's kind of a twofold ask. It's one, are we looking to push this Apple lease forward?
Right.
And two, what would be the financing option attached with pushing it forward? And,
Well, you just said it.
Right. Well,
But
that's
I
what
just-
that's my
yeah, it's my
opinion.
consensus of the committee of what the recommendation is.
That's what a tech reserve fund balance is for, at the LASD.
So you would like to see that move to debt reserve? Okay. Ryan?
Tech reserve.
Okay.
So we'll put it on. We'll have this similar discussion with the full board, and the financing option that the committee has recommended to attach with that. All right. So then the second portion of this is the elementary autism classroom. So the proposal from Dr. Piaski was 1 teacher and 2 teaching assistants. And it's roughly $275,500 there. And then the options that were provided from Dr. Piaski was we could do an in-house option, we can do an option through the IU, and we can have a private institution. And each of those has escalated costs with each of the options above in-house.
And since that conversation, we talked with Dr. Fiaski and asked her to research a little bit more about the IU offerings, what that would cost, what that would entail, what could be provided. So we currently know that we don't have any placements available to send those students outside the district, so that cheapest, the lowest cost to the district is off the table. The next one is the in-house, what we're recommending here. The next one is the IU, and the last one is a private school setting. So if I can have Dr. Fiaski just talk about what options are available to us. Actually, before you do that, why don't you talk to us about what is provided to those students and what those students need, why it's a specialized and special instruction.
Okay, so this particular group of students, like in learning support, there's different levels. We have itinerant level, which is students who spend the majority of their time, 80% usually out in regular ed. And then there's full-time, which is they're with learning support students all day long, which is considered the most restrictive, which is not what you want. You know, we want the least restrictive environment for our students. So then there's the middle option. So this group of students meet that middle option where they would get some time out in regular ed. They could go out to special classes, recess, lunch. They could sit in a science class. However, their science and math is a very direct programming for them. These are students who have language barriers, who are behind in language, so their program is very one-on-one, quick pace, direct in language and math, which is the most essential piece. So that's the component that these students need. They are that supplemental middle ground student. So that's what this class would support them with. So also, as Dr. Mitchell said, as of today, I reached out to all my colleagues and the IU. So locally, all the Adams County school districts have taken back their autism classes. So the classes that the IU used to have no longer have locally anymore. There's one left, but next year, Kanawaga's taking that one back too. So locally, Adams County, there's no LIU autism classes, except the ones that are based, like York Learning Center, and those are full-time students. As I said, in order to go there, you have to have a severe need to go to a full-time based programming. York Learning Center, Franklin Learning Center, or even that third option, those programs, the third option that I shared with you, that particular placement, those are all learning support students in that room. Those are full-time placements. So again, that's not appropriate for this group of students. So these students would have like an autism classroom here in the district, the teacher, 2 aides working with them one-on-one, throughout the school day, supporting them, going out to specials with them, doing direct instruction with them, and just providing that least restrictive environment here at the district.
And how many students do we have that we're looking at for next year?
So since I spoke to you last, it's one more, so now we're up to 6. Because I cannot, it's, you know, we have 2 we have to bring back, because Spring Grove needs their spaces for their students. And now I have 4 incoming kindergartners that I know about. This is what happens over the summer, throughout the year. I just kind of look at what's come in over the years, kind of estimate, take an average, but you don't know. Now that's like in all disability categories. Students move in, I have to find a life skills class or an MDS class or a very therapeutic emotional support class. So you just don't know what's coming in. So right now I have 6. 2 first grade and 4 kindergarten for next year.
Thank you, Dr. Fiasco. Any questions for Dr. Fiasco? Thoughts?
So are you saying the only other option is the private institution?
It's not necessarily, it's an option, but it's not an appropriate option.
You're saying that's the only other option?
It's not, because I don't have, yes, but it's not an appropriate
It's the
option.
only other option available for the
Because I can't,
LAU
right,
doesn't exist, you're telling us.
they don't have autism classes. School districts, like for example, Spring Grove has an autism class. The IU does not have any Adams County autism classes anymore.
Are there any in York
No.
or Franklin?
The Learning Center, York Learning Center, a school-based, center-based program for the high needs full-time, but not that middle ground. Because all school districts, again, even Southwest, they have their own classes now. They took all their classes back.
So what I'm hearing you say, Dr. Fiaschi, is that we've got some students need some small support, 20% maybe, support during the day. Some need full-time support with learning support, but the students that we're getting next year that are autistic need supplemental support, meaning they need to be required by law to be in a placement that's the least restrictive so that they can receive education with their peers, but at the same time receive between 60 and 80% of the day that specialized instruction that they need for their diagnosis.
Correct.
And I would say additionally that the IU no longer supports autism classrooms. Districts are now supporting all autism classrooms, which is,
And none of the other districts in York or Adams County will take any of the kids?
Sounds like
Because
they
they
have
need
their
it for their incoming population.
Yeah.
Because that's why I usually reach out to Conawaga, Upper Adams, but they need them for their
So even like
students.
the Southwest.
Fairfield,
Rose, Dallas-town,
Well, Spring Grove, I could take them back.
those are the ones.
Those are the 2 I have to bring back.
Nice.
I would say it's a constant struggle. And I talk with Dr. Fiasco all the time about it's a constant struggle about losing placements, finding new placements, kids coming in to the district.
And this is not going away. As recently as a few years back, the number was 1 in every 150 diagnoses were autistic or autism on the spectrum. And I'm not sure what that is today, but I believe that I heard it's 1 in every 100. So it is becoming more prevalent. Autism and students on the autistic spectrum are becoming more easily recognized, identified, and then we need to be able to provide the appropriate supports for them.
Are you gonna have a surplus this year like you normally do?
That we'll find out through the audit.
Of course, of course.
So I'll just come back to the finance options. Obviously, like always, we have a tax increase. One of the caveats that Jeannie asked was, what do we have allotted towards the students now? Dr. Fiaschi and I sit down every budget and we estimate how many kids we currently have in placement and how many we think we're gonna have in the upcoming year. That is attributed to essentially a dollar figure or kind of a pot of money that we can spread around as placements come and go. If we boil it down to what a per pupil estimation would be, it's around that $20,000 mark.
But
So
I thought
we-
when you showed us, last time, it was 55,000 per student in-house, and 75,000 if you sent them direct.
That's if we take